You have come here, perhaps, because the world feels strangely calm to you, not peaceful, but orderly, predictable in its habits, reliable in its surfaces. Trains arrive, screens glow, laws appear to hold, the sun rises, the body obeys, society continues to function. Even when something inside you suspects that this stability is thinner than it appears. I want to begin precisely there with this sensation, not with equations, nor with paradoxes, but with a feeling you already know, the feeling that the world behaves as though it was solid, continuous, and self-contained. Even while you sense that this appearance cannot be the full truth, this feeling is not a psychological weakness. It is not anxiety. It is a quiet intuition produced by the same faculty that allows you to recognize pattern, order, and coherence. And it is the same intuition that first compelled physicists, reluctantly and against their habits, to admit that the classical image of the world was incomplete. For centuries, science trained itself to believe that reality exists out there, finished, independent, fully formed, waiting only to be measured. Matter was primary. Consciousness was secondary, an accidental flame flickering on the surface of inert substance. This view was not foolish. It was immensely productive. It built machines, industries, empire. It gave us precision and control. But it also concealed something essential. When quantum theory forced us to abandon the idea of a fully determined world, it did not do so by destroying order. On the contrary, it revealed a deeper order, one that could not be described without reference to observation itself. The act of measurement could no longer be separated from what was measured. The observer could no longer be dismissed as a passive witness. At first, many hoped this was merely a technical inconvenience, a temporary gap in knowledge, a statistical blur that would vanish with better instruments. But the more carefully we looked, the more stubborn the problem became. Reality did not behave as though it existed in a single, definite state prior to observation. It behaved as though possibility itself were fundamental. And yet, you do not experience the world as a blur of probabilities. You experience it as stable. Chairs remain chairs. Faces retain their identities. You wake up in a body that feels continuous with the one you inhabited yesterday. The world presents itself as coherent, durable, almost reassuring in its regularity. This is the discomfort I want you to stay with. How can a world that is fundamentally indeterminate appear so stable? How can a reality that dissolves into probability at its foundations present itself to consciousness as solid, reliable, and familiar? The usual answer is that instability exists only at small scale, and stability emerges at large ones. This explanation is correct, but incomplete. It explains how patterns persist, but not why experience itself has the character it does. It does not explain why the world feels given rather than merely calculated. To address that, we must look not only at matter, but at the structure of experience itself. When you say the world, you are already speaking from within consciousness. There is no external vantage point from which you can verify that matter exists independently of all experience. Every fact you know, every measurement you trust, every instrument you rely upon, ultimately appears as a content of awareness. This is not mysticism. It is a simple, logical observation. And yet, science, out of habit and convenience, has often treated consciousness as an afterthought, something to be explained later. Once the real work of describing matter is complete, I came to believe that this was a profound inversion. Consciousness is not a late arrival in the universe. It is the condition under which the universe is known at all. This does not mean that consciousness creates the world in some childish sense, as though mountains vanish when no one looks at them. It means something subtler and more radical, that the world and consciousness are not two independent things accidentally interacting, but two aspects of a single, indivisible reality. Multiplicity, in this view, is not fundamental, it is perspectival. You experience yourself as a separate individual because experience is always localized. It occurs at a point through a body, along a history. But the awareness that looks out through your eyes is not a fragment cut from a larger whole. It is the whole, experienced under a particular constraint. This is why the world feels stable. Stability is not merely a property of matter. It is a property of coherent experience. The world appears ordered because experience itself organizes appearances into continuity. Without this organizing principle, there would be no world at all, only unbound impressions without persistence or meaning. Life, then, cannot be understood as a machine assembled from dead parts. A living organism is not merely matter arranged cleverly. It is matter participating in a continuous process of order maintenance against entropy. In my reflections on life, I emphasized that organisms feed on negative entropy, not as a metaphor, but as a physical necessity. But what does this truly mean? It means that life is not explained by mechanics alone. The equations of motion describe how systems change, but not why certain configurations persist against the general drift toward disorder. Living systems do not merely obey laws. They actively maintain a form. They preserve identity through change. They remember. Memory is not incidental. It is central. And memory, at its deepest level, is inseparable from awareness. A purely mechanical system has no need to remember itself. A living being does. The continuity you feel as yourself is not a substance. It is a pattern sustained through time by information, organization, and conscious registration. This is where the question of consciousness returns, not as a philosophical luxury, but as a biological necessity. If consciousness were merely an epiphenomenon, a decorative byproduct with no causal role, it would be inexplicable why evolution would conserve it so carefully. Why would nature go to such lengths to preserve something with no function? Why would awareness track reality so faithfully, allowing organisms to navigate, anticipate, and adapt? The more reasonable conclusion is the uncomfortable one, that consciousness is not produced by life, but expressed through it. This does not diminish the achievements of physics. It completes them. The equations that describe matter do not float free of experience. They are abstractions drawn from it. When we forget this, we begin to mistake the map for the territory, the symbol for the thing itself. We begin to believe that reality is made of numbers, when in fact numbers are tools invented by conscious beings to describe regularities in experience. You may feel a quiet resistance here, a sense that this line of thought is dissolving the solidity of the world. But notice the world has not vanished. It has only shifted its foundation. Stability does not come from matter alone. It comes from the deep coherence between experience and the order it apprehends. The universe appears stable because it is not experienced from the outside. It is experienced from within itself. This is why the world can feel trustworthy even when its foundations are strained. Why daily life continues even as physics undermines common sense. Why you can live, love, build, and plan, while knowing perhaps dimly that reality is far less simple than it appears. You are not standing on solid ground. You are standing within a pattern that holds for now, and that realization, properly understood, is not a cause for fear. It is an invitation to humility, to curiosity, to a deeper sense of belonging, to a reality that is not fragmented, but whole even when seen through countless eyes. In the next movement of this inquiry, I want to draw you further inward toward the paradox of individuality itself, and why the sense of being a separate you may be both essential and illusory at once. But before we proceed, remain with this question, not as an abstraction, but as an experience. If the world feels stable, not because it is rigid, but because consciousness itself is the medium of its coherence, then what, exactly, is it that is looking through your eyes right now? Let us now move closer to what feels most intimate and, at the same time, most misleading the experience of being a separate individual. You feel yourself to be enclosed within a body, bounded by skin, born at a certain moment, moving along a private line of time, destined to end. This feeling is so persuasive that it becomes invisible. You do not usually think you are separate. You feel separate. And feeling carries an authority that logic rarely challenges. Yet this feeling is not a proof. It is a condition of perception. Every experience you have ever had arrives from a single point of view. Vision converges behind the eyes. Sound gathers around the ears. Thought echoes within a private interior. From this unavoidable localization arises the conviction that there are many consciousnesses, many centers of awareness, many inner worlds sealed off from one another. Science, following this intuition, has treated individuality as fundamental and unity as an abstraction. But I came to see that this order is reversed. The multiplicity of selves is not a basic fact of reality. It is a mode of appearance. Consciousness does not divide itself into many pieces. Rather, it is expressed under many conditions. The boundaries you experience are not cuts in being itself, but constraints imposed by biological organization. The brain does not generate consciousness as a machine produces heat. It limits consciousness, focuses it, gives it a perspective. Consider how little of reality you are aware of at any moment. The spectrum of light visible to you is narrow. The sounds you can hear occupy a thin band. Even your own body speaks to you only in fragments pain. Pressure, hunger, warmth. The world you experience is not the world in its fullness, but a carefully filtered version, shaped to sustain a living organism. Individuality is one such filter. If consciousness were to experience itself without restriction, there would be no orientation, no contrast, no narrative. There would be no here and there. No, now and then, to live, to act, to survive. Awareness must be focused. It must forget itself as a whole in order to function as a part. This forgetting is not a failure. It is the price of experience. From within this forgetting, the world appears as a collection of separate objects and separate beings. Interacting across space, causes push effects. Bodies collide. Minds seem to reside behind faces. Inaccessible except through language and gesture, this picture is useful. It allows prediction. It enables coordination, but it is not complete. When physics probed deeply enough, it encountered relationships that could not be reduced to local interactions. Entanglement showed us that systems once connected cannot be fully described independently. Even when separated by distance, the behavior of the whole persists in the parts. The language of separateness begins to fail. Biology, too, reveals this failure. An organism is not merely a heap of cells. It is a unity that governs itself, repairs itself, and maintains its form through continuous exchange with its environment. Where exactly does the organism end and the world begin? With every breath, the boundary dissolves. With every meal, matter crosses from outside to inside. Identity persists, not because boundaries are rigid, but because organization endures. The same is true of consciousness. You are not a thing contained in a skull. You are a process, a continuity of experience, sustained through time by memory, to structure and meaning. The feeling of being a self arises because experience refers back to itself. It remembers, it anticipates, it recognizes patterns as mine. But this reflexive loop does not imply isolation. It implies coherence. When you look at another person, you assume correctly that they, too, experience a world from within. You cannot access their thoughts directly, yet you never doubt that they exist. This certainty does not come from proof. It comes from resonance. You recognize in their behavior the same structure you know from yourself, the same rhythm of intention, hesitation, attention. This recognition is a clue. If consciousness were truly fragmented into separate substances, such recognition would be miraculous. Instead, it is immediate. You do not infer another's awareness the way you infer the existence of a distant star. You feel it. You encounter it. What you encounter is not another world sealed off from yours, but another expression of the same underlying reality, organized differently, constrained by another history, another nervous system, another set of memories. The difference is real, but it is not absolute. This is why the world can appear stable even while individual lives change, suffer, and end. The continuity you sense in reality is not the persistence of objects alone. It is the persistence of a deeper order that expresses itself through transient forms. Birth and death do not interrupt this order. They are modes of its transformation. Here the old fear arises. Does this mean individuality is an illusion? That your life is insignificant? That personal meaning dissolves into an abstract whole? No, quite the opposite. Individuality is precious precisely because it is not fundamental. It is a way the universe comes to know itself from a particular angle. Without perspective, there is no experience. Without limitation, there is no story. Your life matters because it is a unique crossing of conditions through which awareness looks out at itself. The danger lies not in recognizing unity, but in mistaking unity for uniformity. The whole does not erase the part, it requires it. When I wrote of the world as a single being, I did not mean a featureless oneness. I meant a reality whose multiplicity is internal, whose differences are expressions rather than division. The wave and the particle are not two things. They are two descriptions. The organism and its environment are not two systems. They are one process viewed at different scales. So too with consciousness. You feel alone because experience is always centered. There is no way around this. But loneliness becomes unbearable only when you believe that this center is cut off from everything else. When you take the perspective to be the whole truth, isolation hardens into despair. Seeing differently, solitude becomes something else. It becomes a condition of clarity, a point from which the whole can be glimpsed, not conceptually, but directly. This is why moments of deep insight often arrive in silence, in withdrawal, in the suspension of habitual role, when the noise of identification quiets, when the story of me versus the world loosens its grip. Something more spacious appears, not a thought, not a belief, but a recognition that the boundary you defend so carefully is also a window. The world does not feel stable because it is simple. It feels stable because it is coherent. And coherence is not imposed from outside. It arises from within, experience itself. The same principle that holds your sense of self together holds the appearance of the world together. You are not a spectator standing before reality. You are one of the ways reality presents itself. In the final movement of this inquiry, I want to bring these reflections to their most uncomfortable edge, where science, biology, and philosophy converge on a question they cannot resolve by analysis alone, whether life and consciousness are not merely phenomena within the universe, but expressions of a deeper order that the universe itself embodies. For now, remain with this thought, gently, without forcing agreement. If the self is a perspective rather than a partition, then what you call your consciousness may be less like a private room, and more like a window shaped by its frame, yet open to the same light that shines through all others. Let us now approach the point where resistance usually sharpens the place where science, having carried us faithfully to the edge, begins to hesitate, not because it has failed, but because its instruments were never designed for what lies ahead. Until now, we have spoken of consciousness as fundamental, of individuality as perspectival, of unity expressing itself through multiplicity. These ideas may feel expansive, even liberating, but they remain tolerable so long as they hover at a certain distance from your daily understanding of life. The true discomfort arrives when we ask what this implies for life itself, not as an object of study, but as a phenomenon that refuses to be reduced to mechanism. When I asked the question, what is life? I did not do so out of biological curiosity alone. I asked it because life presented itself as an anomaly within the physical picture of the world. Here was matter behaving as though it possessed memory, intention, and direction, not in the conscious sense you experience, but in a form that clearly resisted explanation by blind dynamics alone. Living systems do something extraordinary. They do not merely persist, they actively prevent themselves from decaying. They hold a form against the pull of entropy, not briefly, but continuously, sometimes for decades. They maintain identity while replacing nearly all their material components. If you examine your body closely enough, you will find that very little of what constitutes you today was present years ago, and yet you do not experience yourself as a succession of strangers. This continuity is not located in matter. It is located in organization. And organization, at its deepest level, is inseparable from information. Long before the structure of genetic material was known, it was already clear that heredity involved something more subtle than chemistry alone. The persistence of form across generations required a principle of order that could be transmitted, conserved, and interpreted. When the molecular basis of this order was later uncovered, it did not diminish the mystery, it sharpened it. For information is not a thing, it is a relation. A sequence of symbols means nothing unless it is read. A pattern carries no instruction unless it is interpreted within a system capable of interpretation. Life, therefore, cannot be understood as matter plus energy alone. It requires a context in which information matters, where differences make a difference. This brings us unavoidably back to consciousness. It is tempting to say that meaning arises only in minds like yours, reflective and linguistic, self-aware. But this is a narrowing of the problem, not its solution. Meaning, in a more primitive sense, is already present wherever a system responds selectively to its conditions. The cell knows how to repair itself, not because it thinks, but because it embodies a history of successful responses encoded in its structure. This knowing is not conceptual, it is lived. When you touch something hot and withdraw your hand, you do not consult a theory. The response is immediate, patterned, and meaningful. In this sense, your body understands the world before your mind explains it. Life is saturated with such understanding at every level. What, then, distinguishes conscious awareness from this broader field of living responsiveness? Not its existence, but its reflexivity. Consciousness does not merely respond, it knows that it responds. It does not merely register change, it recognizes continuity. It does not merely act, it experiences itself as act. This reflexive turn awareness, folding back upon itself, is not an addition to life, but an intensification of something already present. This is why attempts to locate consciousness at a specific point in the brain are misguided. Consciousness is not a component. It is a mode of integration. It is what organization feels like from the inside when it reaches a certain coherence. But here we must be careful. To say that consciousness is what organization feels like does not mean that organization produces consciousness in the way a factory produces goods. It means that when matter participates in a sufficiently unified process, experience appears as its inner aspect. The outer description and the inner experience are two ways of speaking about the same reality. This is not a hypothesis waiting to be tested. It is a philosophical necessity imposed by the limits of explanation. You can describe every neural event in exquisite detail and still not explain why there is something it is like to be you. You can chart every molecular interaction and still not account for the presence of experience itself. At some point, explanation must give way to recognition. And recognition brings us to a paradox that is often avoided because it unsettles our habits of thought. The universe may not be indifferent to consciousness. Consciousness may not be an accidental spectator, but an expression of the same order that governs physical law. This does not mean the universe thinks in a human sense. It means that the capacity for experience is not foreign to reality. It is woven into it. If this is so, then the stability you perceive in the world is not merely the persistence of external structures. It is the consistency of a deeper coherence that includes both the laws you study and the awareness that studies them. The universe does not appear ordered to you by chance. It appears ordered because you and the order you perceive arise from the same ground. This realization alters the meaning of scientific inquiry itself. Science is no longer the attempt of an isolated mind to decode an alien world. It becomes a dialogue within reality, a way in which the universe articulates aspects of its own structure through conscious reflection. The success of science is not mysterious under this view. It is expected you understand the world because you belong to it. You can know its laws because they are not external to the process that knows them. The discomfort returns here, often in a subtler form. If consciousness is not confined to you, if life is not merely mechanical, if reality is internally coherent rather than assembled from independent parts, then what becomes of control, of mastery, of the comforting belief that the world is a machine to be optimized? Perhaps it was never meant to be one. Perhaps the insistence on control is itself a symptom of misunderstanding, an attempt to dominate what is. In truth, participatory, the world feels stable not because it is inert, but because it is responsive. It holds together not through rigidity, but through relationship. In this light, even the famous image of the cat in the box takes on a different meaning. It was never meant as a puzzle about cruelty or cleverness. It was a gesture toward the absurdity of imagining that reality possesses a definite state independent of all relation. The cat is not suspended between life and death as a trick. It is suspended because the language we use to describe reality breaks down when we deny the role of observation. But observation here is not mere looking. It is participation. The world resolves itself into determinate experience not because consciousness collapses something from outside, but because consciousness is one of the ways resolution occurs. The distinction between observer and observed is not false. It is functional. It serves life, but it is not absolute. We are nearing the edge now, the place where further progress cannot be made by argument alone. In the final movement of this reflection, I want to address the most unsettling implication of all, that the question, how does consciousness arise, may be the wrong question entirely, and that the deeper mystery is how consciousness comes to experience itself as fragmented, finite, and separate at all. For now, let this thought remain with you, quietly, without demand. If life is matter organized to remember itself, and consciousness is life aware of that memory, then what you are experiencing as your mind may be one moment in a far older and deeper act of recognition reality, slowly and imperfectly, becoming aware of itself through you. We have arrived, then, at the place where the question itself begins to turn inward. Up to this point, it has been possible to speak as though consciousness were something to be located, explained, or derived. But now it becomes clear that this approach is itself part of the difficulty, for the one who asks the question is not standing outside the phenomenon being questioned. The inquiry is not external. It is reflexive. You are not asking about consciousness from a neutral position. You are asking as consciousness. This simple fact alters everything. When you ask how awareness arises, you are already presupposing a division between a world that exists independently and a mind that somehow emerges within it. But this division is not given by experience. It is an interpretation layered upon experience, useful for certain purposes, but not mandatory. Experience itself presents a different picture, not mind here and world there, but a seamless field in which distinctions appear locally and temporally. The feeling that you are inside your body and the world is outside it is not a discovery about reality. It is a biological orientation. It allows you to act, to survive, to navigate danger and opportunity. But it is not a metaphysical truth. It is a perspective adopted by life. Once this is seen, the question changes. Instead of asking how consciousness emerges from matter, we must ask how a reality capable of awareness comes to experience itself as divided into observer and observed, subject and object, self and world. This reversal is unsettling because it removes the comfort of distance. You can no longer treat consciousness as a problem over there, to be solved someday by better instruments. You must include yourself in the picture. You must acknowledge that whatever reality is, you are one of its expressions, not a visitor. The world feels stable, then, not because it is finished, fixed, or complete, but because experience requires continuity in order to occur at all. Stability is not imposed by the universe upon consciousness. It is co-arising with it. The regularities you rely upon are not guarantees written into matter. They are the conditions under which coherent experience is possible. Change these conditions too radically, and experience itself dissolves. This is why the deepest disturbances, whether physical or psychological, are not merely changes in circumstance, but changes in meaning. When the continuity of interpretation breaks down, when the patterns that once held no longer cohere, the world does not simply look different, it feels unreal, fragmented, untrustworthy. And yet, even here, something remains. In moments of extreme uncertainty, when the familiar structures of identity weaken, many report not chaos, but a strange clarity, a sense that beneath the collapse of forms, there is a more basic presence that does not disappear. This presence is not personal in the usual sense. It does not carry a name, a history, or a role. It is simply awareness itself, still present when everything else has fallen away. This is not evidence of something supernatural. It is evidence of something prior. Awareness does not depend on any particular content. Thoughts come and go. Sensations arise and fade. Identities shift. But the fact of experiencing remains. It is not created anew with each perception. It is the condition that allows perception to occur. From this vantage, the unity I spoke of earlier is no longer an abstract philosophical claim. It is a lived recognition. The same awareness that looks out through your eyes now has looked out through countless others, under different names, cultures, and circumstances, not sequentially in time, as though passing from one body to another, but timelessly, as a single field expressing itself through many local constraints. Time itself, then, must be reconsidered. You experience time as a flow, a movement from past to future, carrying memory forward. But this flow is not a property of reality as a whole. It is a feature of localized experience. It arises because living systems must retain information about what has occurred in order to act effectively. Time, as you know it, is the form memory takes within consciousness. From outside this constraint, if such a phrase even makes sense, reality need not be arranged as a sequence. What you call now may be one cross-section of a far richer structure, glimpsed only partially through the narrow aperture of biological awareness. This is why the deepest insights of physics often feel counterintuitive. They are attempts to describe a reality not optimized for human experience. And yet, the fact that you can grasp these ideas at all is itself remarkable. It suggests that the mind is not alien to the structure it seeks to understand. You are not peering into an indifferent universe. You are participating in a reality that can, under certain conditions, recognize itself. This does not mean that everything is harmonious, or that suffering is an illusion. Pain is real, loss is real. The constraints under which life operates are severe, and their consequences are often tragic. But tragedy itself presupposes meaning. It presupposes a world in which things matter, in which continuity can be broken, in which coherence can be threatened. A meaningless universe could not suffer. Only a meaningful one can. The stability you sense in the world, then, is not a promise that nothing will change. It is the deeper assurance that change itself occurs within a coherent whole, that even disruption does not fall outside reality, but belongs to its ongoing transformation. When science forgets this, it becomes brittle. It mistakes precision for truth, control for understanding. But when science remembers its place not as an external authority, but as one mode of inquiry within a larger field of meaning, it regains its humility and its power. You came to this reflection, perhaps hoping to understand why the world feels steady even when it appears unstable. You may leave with a more difficult understanding that the feeling of stability is not a guarantee about the world, but a revelation about your relationship to it. You are not held up by solid ground. You are held within a pattern of coherence that includes you. The universe does not stand apart from awareness. Waiting to be known, it knows itself locally, imperfectly, and gradually through life, through mind, through the fragile continuity of experience you call your own. And so the question with which you now depart is not one that can be answered in words or equations. It is a question to be lived. If consciousness is not a product of the world, but one of the ways the world appears to itself, then in this very moment of looking, listening, and understanding who or what is it that is quietly aware